You're listening to the Fitzrock Podcast, interviews where we explore the shifts and transitions of life. Here are your hosts, Keith Rock and Don Fitzsimmons. Hi, everybody. Today, we're so happy to have with us Duke Worthington. Duke is a life coach and motivational speaker. Duke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite.
Duke, tell us about your story. Start us off on your journey to be where you are today.
That's always an interesting way to start it, Keith. Telling the story is fairly easy for me. I can sum it up by being pretty much an idiot for the first half of my life, which gave me great fodder for learning on the second half of my life. And I say that because on paper, I look like the perfect guy. I had the wife, the 3 kids, we had the dog. We literally had a house with a white picket fence, lived in a small community where I was part of the school board and part of the community, a scoutmaster, just doing all the right things. But after 23 years of marriage, kids growing up, last one in the middle of college, we got a divorce. And as time went, realized how little I had shown up for my family. I was there for them and I did things with them, but I realized that the majority of my focus was actually what most of us do, is we look at how we think the directions we try and point our children to as being the best for them, when often it may be disguised as what we think is the best. And we don't spend enough time really paying attention to who they are. And so to really say that in a more succinct way, I learned that I didn't show up very well in a way that allowed my kids and my wife at the time to be truly seen and heard. They were amazing human beings, as they still are. The essence of who they are was just, as everybody's essence is a perfect 10. And that's a lot of what I share in the work that I do with my coaching clients. And when I do presentations, is I talk about how we get to choose showing up for others in ways that allow them to feel truly seen and heard. And most of us in our lives don't get that very often. And for us to give that gift is powerful, and it's life-changing for many people. And that's what I learned from being an idiot the first half of my life, was that you can really change another person's life, but also have a tremendous effect on yours just by opening up your heart and showing up for others so that they can feel validated, so that they feel real, that they have meaning and purpose, and letting that be seen, often without them really knowing their true value. So for many people who have recognized that they may not be showing up as lovingly and powerfully as for their significant others as they might be able to, I get a chance to spend time with them. I should say I'm blessed to spend time with them and talk about ways that they can perhaps show up so that those relationships deepen and the connections are more powerful and communications become much easier. So that may be in a bit more than what you asked for when you said start at the beginning. I've had several different jobs. I've ran an office for a national company out in Colorado and done different things, but soon learned that the speaking and the coaching was a passion for me, and sharing the message. And then actually I say sometimes I'm the one who often gets the most benefit from the conversations. Even though I'm supposed to be the coach, I'll share some things, but the insight that each and every one of the people I speak with and everyone I come in contact, the insight that they possess is just amazing. So my job is really just to ask the right questions so that they can find the answers themselves through the right questions and the patience to be heard. So there you go. Now, after all of that, what questions might you have?
Well, I have one right off the bat. Is you look
Sure,
back on your first part of life, what would it have meant? Put some feet to this for us. What would it have meant to show up for your family?
I think it would have eliminated a lot of years of catching up. And I have amazing relationships with my children now, and even with my ex. and I don't even like to say ex, that's just doesn't seem to have, it's a bit of a negative connotation, but the lady who I was married to for 23 years and we raised the kids, she had two girls when we got married. So I had two girls at 6 and 4 when we married, and then we had a son together. And so what happened, to answer your question, Don, was we had decent relationships, but I recognized that they could have been much deeper, much more loving. I could have been there for them in ways that were different than just physically being there, but to truly hear their concerns, their wants, their needs, and not just try and fix it all the time, which often many men have a tendency to do. And what I've learned is that no one's broken. No one's ever broken. They don't need to be fixed. They just crave to be heard and to be seen. And understanding that in a way that I've now come to understand it and see the differences that my clients have, it would have changed the relationships. Obviously, could have still been married, maybe not, but the relationships would have been different, and they might not have struggled as much as they did trying to find themselves. I didn't give them the opportunity to see who they were, and so they had to work a little harder to figure that out themselves.
Have you thought any about like how you would have done that differently? Like examples of what that might have looked like. What I'm thinking of, Duke, are people who are listening who are like, yeah, I really want to do that for my kids and my spouse, but I don't really know how.
Great point. And I will say that when I work with people, it takes a while because there are lots of nuances and subtleties. It's simple, but it's not always easy because of society and how we're brought up. We don't often give the other person a chance to truly feel seen and heard. So what that looks like is the easiest way, and the one thing that I laugh the most about when I have conversations is, it's not about you. Get out of your way. In fact, I laughingly talk with some of my clients about learning to be seen by disappearing, getting out of your own facade, your persona that you think you have, the beliefs that you've created that you think are right, whether they are or not, they're made up. So just being able to step away from that, realize it's not about you, and to be there for your kids, for your significant others, without an agenda and also without expectations. Those two things are huge. And we practice that. I talk about it in presentations, but coaching clients get a chance to practice that. So we learn what that really looks like. Is that close to what you were asking?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Something I thought of when I was listening to what this last part you were saying is it better to be right or to be happy? Because sometimes that can be the dynamic either with children or with a spouse, is sometimes people in those situations insist on being right, but they're not happy. That's just something I thought of. Does that resonate at all with you?
Well, actually, people may think that I slipped you a note to ask me that question, because at the end of this month, I contributed to a book as a co-author. I contributed a chapter. The title of that chapter is The Rightness Syndrome. And that's exactly what I talk about, is our need to be right versus choosing happiness. So it's very much what that's about. And that's what I learned about in relationships too, is we often do argue for I call it rightness. We argue for our rightness, and it's to the detriment of our relationships, of being able to connect. And I think a lot of that goes back to fixing. When we're trying to fix someone, it's because we think we're right. You know, we have the right answers. We have the right ways for them to do things. We have what we think is going to make the difference, when it's really about being right and fixing, instead of just getting out of our own heads and allowing the other person to be seen and heard. And you guys will hear me say that a lot. I get a kick out of now people that I know, and we get to spend time together at different meetings and stuff. And they know my question to them is going to be, how do you choose to show up today? How are you showing up for your family today? What's been going on? Tell me what's happening in your world on how you're showing up. So that's the theme. And that really is what I think makes a difference. And the showing up is based on your question, Keith, is realizing we get to ask ourselves that question. Do I want to be right, or do I want to be happy? Because there's not many cases, of none that I can think of, that you get to be both. Unless, and I guess I should backtrack. I've had several people ask me that. Well, I want to be both. I want to be right and happy. And the fact of the matter is, you can. And often we are in conversations and in our relationships with others. We're just cruising along, having a nice conversation, and there is no rightness or anything else until one thing is said that catches you. You pause a little bit, you think about it, and then you begin to dig into it a little more deeply because you have an opinion on that. And that's okay until they share their opinion and you begin to disagree a little bit. And now is the time when, if you learn to, and that's one of the things, again, that I work on with my clients, when you learn to recognize that's beginning to happen, that dynamic is shifting from happiness to the need to be right. If you can catch that, you can ask yourself that simple question. Well, okay, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? And then you get to choose. If you want to be right, go for it. But just realize the happiness is just going to disappear pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love that. I love, like, I see what happens in relationships oftentimes is uh, two things is what you were saying is like someone will have a differing view or a point of view about you can whatever it is.
Anything.
And it's like, is it so important that we change their minds, or is it important that we just accept that, are they a good person? Did they live a good life? Then why do we need to change them? Can't we just accept them for who they are and their belief? And then showing up is like huge. Like showing up for people in important stuff is like really vital. I see that all the time.
Yeah, so true. And I will share something, Keith and Don, that my great grandmother used to say when I was younger, and it didn't register as many lessons when we're younger. It didn't register till I was much older, but the saying she used to use, and it came about because I was the oldest of all the grandchildren. And so I'd be out there directing them on how to play games and do all these things and outside by my rules. And she would sometimes say to me, a person changed against their will is of the same opinion still. Well, I was the biggest, I was the loudest, I was the strongest, so I could pretty much get them to do anything I wanted them to. But she would say that, and I'd kind of shrug my shoulders. I could remember thinking, what's that got to do with us playing a game out here? But in her subtle and soft way and loving way, she was letting me know that even though I got them to do what I wanted them to, their opinions had not changed. They were still believing what they believed. They just were going to wait to another time to do it. And that continues on to in our adult life. That's what happens, exactly what you said in that way, is that what does it really change when we argue for our rightness? It really doesn't change them, and we just create distance between us, what I call chasms. We're always taking little pieces out of our connection, and eventually it'll create a chasm, which often is what ends up in divorce or a child who doesn't speak to you or those types of things. So yeah, good point. Good observation, Keith.
What facilitated your transition in your thought process from what you referred to as like the first half of life to second half of life kind of thinking?
Divorce was a huge shift. Thinking I had it all together and recognizing I didn't was really the biggest shift. And then I will tell myself one more time, about 3 years after that divorce, I met an amazing lady, and I was already a certified coach by then, or had gotten certified and was doing more coaching. I'd been a bit of a consultant, but I liked the coaching model much better. And so with the speaking and the coaching, I met another lady, and we fell madly in love. I did, at least. And we got married fairly quickly. That ended up in about 3 years with another divorce. And at that time, I thought, wait a minute, here's the guy who's supposed to know all about communications. I'd been doing at that point 15 years or 20 years on communication process, keynote speeches at state conventions. I mean, I was moving along doing fairly well, but I had learned all the techniques and the strategies. And I think that aha moment of what the hell just happened? I just lost another marriage, had me really dig deep. And I think, as often happens, as the saying goes, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. I had several amazing mentors and coaches that seemed to come in my life at that time that asked me, extremely powerful questions that I had to go deep to figure out. And the result was I recognized that I sucked at showing up for other people. And then as I began to recognize that, I started paying attention. And most of us, I hate to say, know how to show up peripherally. You know, we know how to physically be there, and we can kind of listen, kind of pay attention, but most of our world evolves around ourselves. And so as I learn more about that and begin to have conversations, like I say, the coaching has been a great, actually, I'll back up. Most people do what we practice, and we learn what we need to learn, and we share that in an effort to learn more about ourselves. And I think that's what coaching did for me for many years, was allowed me to dig deeper, ask questions that I had to ask myself, and learn how we get to show up for others, how we get to love others. And I also contrast that with I spent 5.5 years in the Army, and I was a sergeant, was actually assigned special assignment to a correctional custody facility, which is like a drill sergeant on steroids. So it was pretty hardcore and very, very intense. And so I went from that type of facade, we'll say, of a persona that I had taken of I didn't back down from anything or anyone, and I could make it happen, and I was going to get things accomplished and could go through a brick wall if I was told to or asked to. And I think that shift from that way of looking at life and going after life and being the leader and being the one who could make things happen, to recognizing the damage I was doing in that process, that I couldn't change people's opinions, that they were the same, that I was just getting my way. And so again, another long answer to a wonderful question, but it was just finding the right people and the mentors and coaches to ask me the powerful questions so that I dug deep enough to where I could begin observing and then asking those questions of others.
How long did it take your kids to recognize a difference in you?
A little while. I think one of the moments that stands out. I had a daughter that lived in Texas. she's moved back up closer to in the Midwest now, but she was in Texas and had a son who she struggled with a bit. And if she listened to this podcast, Neely, you may remember this story, but I so appreciate what she said, because as she was going through some things that she was struggling with her son, in the middle of it, and she was pretty adamant about what she thought needed to happen. Need is also an interesting word. I often point out to my clients. I call it a red flag word. Anytime you use the word need towards others or yourself, pay attention to what the connotation it has. It has a result that's usually not positive. People pull back on the word need. But anyway, I asked her what she was feeling her son really needed to learn and the direction he needed to go. And so she began to share that with me. And when she did, my question was, why do you think that's the case? What makes you believe that's the way to direct him? And she said, well, Dad, because that's what you taught us. That's what you hammered into us. And I said, Neely, I was an idiot. I'm so sorry. And she there was just a pause. And she said, who is this? And
It's funny.
I said, Neely, please don't take the things that I pushed so hard that had to be the way we are, because they were just my opinions and my beliefs based on only the things I had interpreted and absorbed over the years. And right or wrong, everybody gets to choose that. You figure out how you want to work through this, and I will support you in any way you choose. It is your choice. Please don't base what you're teaching on what I teach you. Pull out the good, and anything you question, move forward. But when she said, who is this? I knew maybe that I had perhaps, possibly made a bit of a shift.
Duke, so help us understand, maybe this is something else that you've experienced or can help us with. Like when somebody doesn't show up for us or somebody disappoints us in some way, how do you handle that? Or how do you handle it now as opposed to maybe you handled it before?
Well, Keith, that is a question that has many, many multiple directions that it can be explained through. The short answer is, once we realize that who we are, the essence of who we are, the spirit of our humanity, and I often ask people who have children, I will go through a little process with them of asking them about their firstborn or any of their children. When they were first born and they were handed to them, and they held this little amazing human being in their hands, this newborn child. And I asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being amazing, where would you rate them? And every parent, I don't care what the situations or challenges with the birth or the newborn, they all still look at that amazing human being as a perfect 10, as an amazing 10. And so what I share by that is, when we grow and when we pull on these different layers of our beliefs and our personas and the ways we think we should be in society, I ask them, does that ever change the essence of that amazing little child that you gave birth to? And the answer is no. It never changes. So we begin to dig in more deeply about the essence of every human being. And it's a perfect 10. And so I have that conversation with husbands and wives. I speak usually with just one. I work with one because one can make such a difference in a relationship. And they'll ask the question you did, Keith. In fact, I had that question asked of me today already in a conversation. Well, what if he starts saying this and does this? And I said, okay, just look at him and let him talk. Show up for him in a way that he can feel seen and heard, because I would guess most of the time we have an adversarial approach to most of our relationships if things aren't said or done in the way we want them to be. And so it just creates a chasm, again, as I mentioned. And the research shows that you both know, and most everybody that's listening to this, here's the fight or flight mode that we go into. And many people say fight, flight, or freeze. And that's the way most people have a natural way of responding. And so we fall into those naturally. But the neat thing about human beings is that we have the ability to pause after a stimulus, very different from most any other animals, creatures. We can have a stimulus, somebody make a comment, we get to pause. And in that pause, if we're aware and paying attention, we get to lovingly get curious and ask them, why the heck did you call me an idiot? Or, stuff like that. So it's a bit of a long answer to your question, Keith, and it's why I say the subtleties and nuances of the showing up of which I talk about is much deeper, much more loving, but it also allows something very interesting, is that when you show up for another person in that manner, truly loving, and they feel safe and heard and validated, we're wired for reciprocity. And it doesn't always happen, but most all the time, when you can lovingly show up for a person in that manner, at some point, they will get curious about you, and they will give you the chance to be seen, and they will see you in a different light than maybe they've ever seen you before. You're not the adversarial foe that they've believed in the last half a dozen years of their marriage, or whatever the case may be. And so by just one person showing up in a way that the other can truly feel seen and heard, everything changes. And if there's a comment made that would normally be hurtful, and you just step back and get really curious as to why they believe that, then you open up the doors for greater understanding, more love, more communication, and amazing relationships. Wow. There you go. I kind of went off on a bit of a diatribe there. I'll get off my platform now, but
I can tell.
This is so powerful. What's that, Don?
I'm just going to say, I can tell you believe this really strongly. There's some controversial stuff in there.
Absolutely.
I definitely don't want to come across as, if you're being physically abused, it's your fault, and all you got to do is be nice to the person.
Right. No,
to change
absolutely
it.
not. Yep.
And even though everyone to the core, the core of their being isn't broken, there certainly is a lot that can happen to us that causes us to not respond in healthy ways. And it will take more than just someone being kind to us to change that, I think.
You're very right, and it's a valid point. In fact, one of the first things that happens in conversations that I have, and even in presentations, is someone will always say, "I don't want to be treated as a doormat. I don't want to become a doormat," which is a little bit of what you just shared, and that's in the way that we look at life and that we look at how we respond to others, a very valid concern. So that's why I say it takes a while to dig in deeply enough to recognize that we can step back. And I've given presentations on boundaries, and there's some interesting philosophies on boundaries. We're taught to draw the line, and if they cross that, it's over. And I have a bit of a challenge with boundaries, because so very often those boundaries are created through expectations. And what I talk to people about is, if you're going to set a boundary and you want to call it a boundary, that's awesome. But make sure you have an agreement with the person you're setting the boundary on, so that they fully understand and know that that's your spot. And to do it in a way that's not again, confrontational. You say, well, they crossed my boundary, I'm out of here. They're not, so you see what I'm saying? It's getting into that place, that state of mind, and where your heart is, that you can have real conversations as adults, which I have to say, it took me a long time to understand that. And I still find myself falling on my face to have adult conversations, because we revert back to our childish things that we learned as we were young, that work for us, and we just follow them. I think that there's just so much power in being aware and making the choice to show up for others so they can feel seen and heard. And when I talk about the essence of who we are, I work with a client no less than 5 months, because it takes that long to begin to fully dive into these philosophies and these ways of showing up for others. And so trying sometimes to answer questions and give the information out in a short 30, 45-minute conversation, you just touch on it, that often will bring up more questions than it does really give solutions. So that's kind of a roundabout way of answering what you brought up. But good point. People do feel that way.
So Duke, tell us all of the things you're currently doing, and how people can contact you or find more about you out.
Great. So right now I'm in the process of redoing a website, which often you hear that from people. But with the book coming out, it's will be out the end of this month. And the title of that is The Happiness Code. And I'll be one of many. There's like 20 authors in there, so 20 chapters. But it's on happiness, and mine is the rightness syndrome, choosing rightness over happiness, as we mentioned earlier. So that will be coming out. You can find it on Amazon, the Happiness Code, or you can look up Duke Worthington. I've now created an author page, so I'm letting that happen. And then LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, and I will be creating more opportunities to connect through there. But there's lots of different ways, and I don't know if you post after the podcast or what you do, but I always give out my number, which is 314-256-9280. And anyone that would be interested in having a conversation or talking to me about a presentation, I would be honored. And I will say, in all of this that happens, it can feel sometimes like it's a pretty heavy topic, and they're very in-depth conversations. The reality is that the majority of these conversations are spent laughing, because when we recognize sometimes how we horribly show up for others and ourselves, we can see the humor in that, and we start laughing. And so I'll share that the presentations are fun. We laugh at the silliness that we do, how uber focused we are on ourselves often, and how powerfully we can begin to show up for others. And so we laugh and we have fun with it, and we really enjoy it. But to contact me, it's Duke Worthington. My company's called Enrichment Coaching. I've been doing it about 20 years now. And you can reach out either through that, and it will direct you to the LinkedIn or the new site when it's up, and we will go from there.
Thank you so much. Wow, you are doing a lot, and you are very well seasoned in so many different things, and I just love how you've transformed your life based on what you've seen and heard. So thanks so much for sharing your story today, Duke.
Thanks, Duke.
Don, Keith, both of you, thanks for inviting me. I appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fitzrock Podcast. The music you are hearing is Swim with Wild Musical Instruments by Your My Muse. Copyright 2019 and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. Until next time, have a fantastic life.